our principal is an authority on Indian philosophy and Vedanta. So I requested ma'am to shed light on this concept of pluralism in general, and then we can go with the our resource person. Thank you. Over to
Good
you,
evening. Thank you, Shruti. I take this opportunity to welcome the guest speaker today and all the colleagues and research scholars, students across the country. Extremely happy and delighted to having chosen the topic on pluralism. This has been one of the most fascinating and very exciting topic to all of us, especially for academicians. As Shruti very rightly mentioned, that pluralism, when we talk about it, it is much less uh, debated or discussed when it comes to economic side of it. By the word pluralism, etymologically, when we want to define it, it means that it gives a different kind of perspective. Now, do we want so many types of perspective when we want to look into one problem? Or can we hold on to any one perspective and set a standard to it? These are issues that we usually talk about it, the advantages of talking in terms of pluralistic ideas. At the same time, the problem of not able to set a standard to it. So at the often I just get an idea of social pluralism, we have religious pluralism, we talk about cultural pluralism. We under any topic under this we can have the pluralistic idea. Now this gives you various perspectives and also opinions which are all required in order to understand one particular concept which we want to delve into it more deeply. There are advantages and disadvantages for that. When I have multiple ways of looking at it, there is a possibility of getting carried away by that and have a chaotic understanding of it. Or another way, which usually Jaina calls it as very beautifully in their religious studies, they call it as Anekantavada. The concept of Anekantavada is having one topic in the center and looking at it from all sides of it. They give a very common example they talk about it is a blind man looking at an elephant. Now, philosophers like us, when we take up these kind of examples, we say that when six blind men look at an elephant, each one of them touching different part of the body, they look at and conclude that this is how the elephant looks like. Whether it's like a wall because it is touching the stomach, or a pillar if it touches the leg, or a trunk which is like a rope. Each one has got its own his or her own imagination because you have got only one side of the perspective of it. What should an economist or a philosopher should do? What is very important is collect all these perspectives, and from these perspectives can we have some coherence, can we have some consistency of thought, and can we bring about a concept out of it. The ideology that comes out of this entire format that we are talking about is very essential today. In the modern academic world, students cannot or just be satisfied with one perspective of any idea. We want to have different kind of looking at it. And therefore, I think as Economic Association is setting the ball rolling to the students to have economic pluralism, and of course, you will have a lot of challenges. You want to understand the theories, you want to understand the pedagogies, which I'm sure the speaker today, the Thomas, will definitely highlight a lot of understanding on that. The theoretical perspective connecting to it will give an opening that you are also able to look at it from these formats. It's possible also to look at it from other sides of the same coin. So these are the things I think are very essential, and the holistic perspective of it can come. In the process of, we may not be able to standardize one theory or one pedagogy. I think that has to be taken for granted and understand it. That's it's a drawback, but that is how it has to work on. Otherwise, with one religious pluralism, when we discuss on a topic so widely, we cannot claim one religious perspective or one socialistic perspective, one cultural perspective as the final or the absolutely correct one. So there is no correct or incorrect in it. There is no right and wrong in it. It's all perspectives, because in humanities we do talk about how different way of looking at things can give us a better understanding of the entire thing. I wholeheartedly appreciate all the initiative taken by the Economics Association and the department under the leadership of Dr. Shruti Pandey and her entire team, who are young, robust, extremely dynamic, and I'm sure the entire team will come up with a lot more programs I once again welcome our guest speaker, Ms. Thomas, and all the other guests who have joined us today across the country for this wonderful seminar. Wishing you all the best, Shruti. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Now I would request Shivangi to give a formal introduction to our guest.
A very good evening to respected principal ma'am, esteemed faculties, research scholars, and all the distinguished guests. I, Shivangi Sharma, Assistant Professor, Department of Economics, SIES College of Arts, Science and Commerce, Autonomous, Mumbai. I'm glad to take this opportunity of introducing our guest speaker for the national webinar on pluralism in economics, theories and pedagogies, organized by the Department of Economics, SIES College of Arts, Science and Commerce. It gives me an immense pleasure to introduce and welcome our today's resource person, Professor Alex M. Thomas. He's working as a faculty with the School of Arts and Sciences at Azim Premji University. Prior to this, he has taught introductory microeconomics and macroeconomics to undergraduate students at University of Sydney. He has received his economics education from the Universities of Madras, Hyderabad, and Sydney. His area of expertise includes history of economic thought and classical political economy. He has reviewed 13 books on the topics of his expertise. Professor Thomas has also written and published a book on macroeconomics and another one on pluralistic economics, and is presently working on the textbook on history of economic thought. Professor has also published many research papers and research articles in many national and international journals, magazines, etc. He has delivered more than 20 invited lectures in the top colleges and universities of the nation. I again welcome Professor Thomas for today's session. I now request Professor Thomas to take over the session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, everyone, for that warm welcome. First of all, I must thank Professor Sampath and Shruti for all the logistics and inviting me to give this talk. And also a special thanks to the principal, Dr. Uma Shankar, for giving a brief of pluralism. And I will engage with some of the themes that you have mentioned and maybe make some comments on how one can see pluralism differently in teaching and whereas it can be seen differently in research. And having said that, I'm just going to try and share my slides. Yeah. Can one of you please confirm that the slides are visible?
Yes, it is visible.
Yes. Okay.
Yes, it is visible.
All right. So again, I'm very happy to talk about pluralism in economics, and I thought that today I'll also focus on pedagogies. Often when I've given talks, I've focused on the theories part of it, but of late I think that it's important to bring in both. And given that I'm talking to an audience of both students and teachers, I thought that it might be useful to talk a little bit about pedagogy as well. So let me begin by sort of outlining the current state of economics education as I see it. One is that the dominant theory that is being taught all across, I mean, in India, across the world, is marginalist economics, or sometimes called neoclassical economics. I'm going to refer to it as marginalist economics because I feel that's a bit more precise term. And when it comes to empirics or methods, the dominant method that is being taught is econometrics, and this is also widely used in research. When it comes to pedagogy, most of us are using textbooks, again, of a mainstream kind, which means that we are using neoclassical or marginalist textbooks, and we use exams for evaluation. One more point which is of importance is we are also constrained in many ways by the university ranking systems. All universities want to go up in the ranking system. There is also a journal ranking business. So again, we want to publish in the top ranking journals because it affects our promotion. And all this is also connected because of these push to go higher in the university ranking, in the journal rankings. It also has an impact on all our workloads. And now, particularly, I'm talking about the workload of teachers at the moment, and I'll come back to it later. So this is just illustrative curriculum, some of which I've taken from the University of Bombay curriculum, but of compulsory courses, some of which are currently taught and in many other universities and colleges. So we have microeconomics, macroeconomics, mathematics, econometrics, Indian economy, economic growth, international trade. And often electives can be any of these following: agricultural development. I noticed that there's an elective on Maharashtra economy. History of economic thought is an elective. Environmental economics, labor economics. Now, in a way, if somebody looks at this, sometimes one might feel that there is pluralism here. There is pluralism in this limited sense that we are talking about different issues. We are talking about environment, we are talking about labor, we are talking about agriculture, we are talking about micro, we are talking about macro. But in terms of the theoretical framework, essentially all these courses predominantly use the marginalist economics framework. In other words, what we see in most of the curricula is a certain kind of monism. And monism, in a way, I'm using it in opposition to the idea of pluralism. Right? So, and I've just highlighted the definition that I'm using it in here. That is the reduction of all processes, structures, concepts, etc. to a single governing principle, the theoretical explanation of everything in terms of one principle. And here you can replace the principle with a paradigm. So the explanation of everything in terms of the marginalist paradigm. That is what is happening, whether it's agricultural economics, labor economics, environmental economics. All these explanations are being provided with the marginalist economic paradigm. So what we really have is monism, and pluralism in a way challenges this idea of monism. So what is pluralism? Here I'm talking about, again, we are trying to explain the same concept. So if we are talking about prices, we have different theories of prices. So in theory, in economics, we have marginalist economics, which is the orthodoxy or the mainstream, but we also have various alternatives. So it could be classical political economy, post-Keynesian economics, Marxian political economy. And there are also similarities between classical economics, post-Keynesian economics, Marxian economics. And sometimes all these three are put together as heterodox economics. So because there is an orthodox economics, heterodox economics also exists. When it comes to the question of empirics, although we primarily teach kinds of econometrics, there are also various other ways to understand our surroundings. One can do ethnography, one can do textual analysis, one can do historical studies. But we tend to favor, if we look at the curriculum, we tend to favor econometrics, we tend to favor marginalist economics. And what I'm calling for, or in this presentation, is to ask for a curriculum that teaches students multiple perspectives, both in theory and in empirics. And when it comes to research, they can decide whether they want to use marginalist economics or Marxian political economy in terms of theory, or they can decide to use econometrics or ethnography or textual analysis when it comes to empirics. But that choice should be open to the students. This brings me to the next point of what I call fashions in economics. And what I mean by that is, if we look at the history of what has been considered popular in economics research, we see many things. So at least from the time that I've been studying, I've seen many kinds of economics that has been considered to be fashionable or what everyone wants to work in. At one point, it was general equilibrium theory. Then it was welfare economics. For a long time, people spent a lot of resources and published PhDs on the economics of poverty. Then you noticed a huge surge in financial economics research. After that, game theory, many people were working in game theory, behavioral economics. And today one can say that, again, a lot of these things are also related to what is happening in the West. So now what is popular is development microeconomics. So this is in terms of broadly the theoretical aspects of it. When it comes to empirics, again, there have been different kinds of things that people have worked on. Initially linear programming, then descriptive statistics, input-output models, particularly during the planning era. Then people started using OLS regression. There was a point of time when VAR models were used uh, extensively. Time series econometrics was also popular. And today, what is popular, primarily at least, is microeconometrics or policy evaluation, where people use instrumental variable and RCTs. But if you look at all of this, I'm calling them fashions in economics. We cannot say that, we cannot think that this constitutes intellectual progress in economics. These are all different tools and different aspects of understanding our economic surroundings, and we cannot really say that time series econometrics is an advance over OLS regression, or we cannot say that microeconometrics is an advance over input output models, or we cannot say that game theory is an advance over welfare economics. All these things are trying to understand different issues. And so then the challenge really for us as educators, as teachers and students, is how do we get the student to understand this vast landscape? In other words, how do we get the student to understand the history of economic thought? And this brings me to a very important question. Is this scientific progress? Or how do we understand scientific progress? One is to take a linear view of scientific progress and to look at it like this. Adam Smith published his work. Ricardo then wrote Marx, Keynes, Samuelson, Solow, and then Mankiw. So Mankiw has published many textbooks. So if we think that scientific progress in economics happens in a linear fashion, all we need to do is read Mankiw. We don't have to read Samuelson, we don't have to read Marx, we don't have to read Smith, because everything that is good in all their work is found in Mankiw. Or alternatively, should we read Arthashastra, or should we read Nauroji? Should we read Ambedkar's economics? Should we read V.K.R.V. Rao's economics, K.N. Raj's economics, or Sukamoy Chakravarti's economics? Is it that Amartya Sen's work contains all that is good in all these thinkers? And the answer is no. First of all, ideas do not grow linearly like this. People have various kinds of persuasions, and often ideas are forgotten because of various kinds of fashions that might come up. Ideas are often expelled. So, for instance, the question can be posed, why is Marx's economics not taught in macroeconomics usually? Why does Marx not figure that? So some ideas have been expelled, and some ideas have been extolled or have been said that this is a good idea. Sometimes when people win Nobel Prizes, this happens, or various kinds of other awards. So the ideas come up and are retained because of various reasons. So one thing is clear, they do not grow linearly, and we cannot talk about scientific progress in economics in a linear fashion. We must also remember the politics of academia, and here identity matters. There are concerns about hierarchy. Who are the gatekeepers? Who are the ones who are editors of journals, chairpersons, etc.? Apart from that, there is also the sociology of science, which is connected to the politics of academia, where how do people come together? After all, human beings are involved in this. And what is the role of power in knowledge production? So it is important that we keep in mind the production of ideas and the dissemination of ideas, and that they happen in a social and political context. Having laid out these as sort of broad preliminaries, let me move on to part one, where I'm going to engage with theoretical aspects. So when I'm going to talk about two kinds of theories to give you a flavor of pluralism. So what we have in the mainstream economics is marginalist economics. So what we study in microeconomics usually have, all of them, you can find their origins in their works. It can be inspired by Jevons, Walras, Marshall, Samuelson, or Solow. Solow not so much in microeconomics, but in macroeconomics. Then there is an alternative perspective and an alternative paradigm, which is classical political economy, which is found in the work of Smith, Ricardo, and Marx, and more recently in the work of Piero Sraffa and Krishna Bharadwaj. And I'm going to tell you how, although they are trying to understand the same economy, they have very different views of how the economy works and therefore policy implications. So let's start with the theories of price, and this is what is usually taught in microeconomics. Under conditions of equilibrium, in a competitive economy, prices are determined by their marginal utilities. Prices of commodities are determined by their marginal utilities. In other words, what we have is a utility theory of value. It is utility that gives value to these commodities, and that is what explains prices. Because utility is a subjective thing, your utility for a commodity can be different from my utility for the same commodity. Therefore, it is subjective in nature. And therefore, this theory of value is sometimes called the subjective theory of value. In classical economics, relative prices have been studied using various ways. You have the land and labor theory of value, which brings together land and labor, and prices are explained using that. You have the labor theory of value, which has come to, or most popular in the work of Marx and Marxian political economy. There is also another notion of price, which is found in the work of Piero Sraffa, and he sees this in the work of the classical political economists writing before Adam Smith, this idea of physical real cost. Now, what is common to all of it? What is common to all of them is that whether it's land or labor, they can all be objectively measured. So in the sense of what is the time that goes into production of a commodity? So it can be labor time. What is the acres of land that go into the production of a commodity? In other words, this theory of value has an objective basis. So whatever we are measuring does not depend on who is measuring it. In that sense, the classical economics has an objective theory of value and marginalist economics has a subjective theory of value. Theories of income distribution. This is also commonly taught in microeconomics, but it has implications for macroeconomics and it has implications for labor economics. It has implications for many other fields of economics. Again, under conditions of competition, in equilibrium, real wage is determined by the marginal product of labor and the rate of profit is determined by the marginal product of capital. And this comes under marginal productivity theory, which is again commonly taught. What marginalist economists are saying here is that distribution or income distribution is endogenously determined in the model. That is, it's completely determined within the labor market and within the goods market. Everything is able to be modeled. And when labor gets their contribution, capital gets their contribution, what we see is a harmonious view of how society functions. So if there can be harmony like this, then the policy implication is that let's make the economy more competitive. Let's make the labor market more competitive. Let's make the capital market more competitive so that all factors of production get what they contribute or get their marginal contribution. But classical economists have a very different understanding of income distribution. First of all, they believe that distribution is an exogenous variable. In other words, you cannot really have a theory of income distribution. So then the question is, what explains income distribution? According to classical economists, it is determined by power. Again, power could be of various kinds. It could be relating to gender or patriarchy. It could be about caste. It could be about region. It could be about international countries. And it is also determined by politics, by policy. It is determined by culture. So what we think everyone should have will go into how much wages should be. It is also determined by history. What is also evident in the classical political economy is that there is no harmonious kind of a perspective or a vision that is there in marginalist economics. Instead, they highlight that there is a conflict of income distribution between workers and capitalists. What constitutes income distribution, or one of the main features of income distribution in classical political economy, is a conflict between workers and employees. Now, let me move on to the theory of growth. This is often taught sometimes in macroeconomics or sometimes in growth theories, or in some ways it figures in development economics as well. Marginalist economics uses the supply side growth theory, which makes use of the aggregate production function. So A refers to a technology parameter or total factor productivity. L and K refer to labor and capital, and Y refers to aggregate output. And Solo's growth theory especially says that if you have a growth in L, you will have economic growth. Or when technology is taken into account, if you have a growth in A, you will have a growth in output. So this is what we find, and this is what is commonly taught, and this is visible in the work of Solo and Romer and Nordhaus. Romer and Nordhaus won the Nobel Prize recently. What we see in their theoretical work is that there is a tendency to full employment of labor. And these supply side growth theories cannot accommodate for aggregate demand deficiency. Now, aggregate demand deficiency is a central feature of advanced countries and developing countries. And Keynes and Kaletsky made this very clear in their work in the 1930s. So the question of aggregate demand is central. In the tradition of classical political economy, along with the work of Sraffa and the insights from Kaletsky and Keynes, what you have is demand-led growth theory, which has very different policy prescriptions from supply-side growth theory. In particular, it highlights the role of autonomous aggregate demand. And what are some of these constituents of autonomous aggregate demand? One could be government expenditure. It could be autonomous private consumption. It could be exports, or it could be autonomous investment. So depending on policy constraints and other factors, growth can be driven by a combination of all of them, or one of them could be the primary driver. And in this paradigm or framework, there is no tendency to the full employment of labor. And if you want to ensure there is full employment of labor, you need to have some kind of intervention into the economy, which could take the form of government expenditure. So this sort of brings me to, I've sort of surveyed different kinds of theories. This brings me to how we can think about pluralism maybe. And I'm just going to share with you two kinds of curriculum, again, which tells you maybe one or two ways of going about incorporating pluralism. So one is to think of doing microeconomics, microeconomics and macroeconomics, but by including at least two ways of understanding or explaining the same prices and distribution, or output and growth, by having at least two paradigms. So marginalist and classical, similarly for macroeconomics. Usually what is generally done is just the marginalist school of thought with some maybe incorporation of Keynesian elements, but it's still fundamentally marginalist in nature. One can have history of economic thought because we want students also to learn textual analysis along with econometrics and mathematical methods. All these are compulsory courses. And to have a historical approach, apart from looking at econometrics, one can have economic history and a course in Indian economy. So all these I'm visualizing as compulsory courses. Again, this is just an illustration. One can have different ways of going about it. Then we can have electives where we have advanced courses in marginalist micro and macroeconomics, classical micro and macroeconomics, similarly advanced courses in econometrics and mathematics. And I also think actually this could even be a compulsory course, a course in politics, philosophy, and ethics. Because economics or political economy has close relations with philosophy, with ethics, and with politics. So how do we integrate them, and how do we give the students a well-rounded perspective? And I would also go so far as to say that it is important that economists read good literature. And here I'm talking about fiction. It could be poetry. It could be other kinds of books, but I think it's important because there are elements that models and theories cannot communicate, which literature can do very well and very effectively. We can have elective courses dealing with topics like the issues of gender, caste, ecology. And in each of these courses, you can have a marginalist part along with econometrics related to it. You can have a classical political economy part along with econometrics or data related to it. And I think, it's good that there is a course in Maharashtra economy, but you can even do a more local course just by focusing on the Mumbai economy. Just in terms of microeconomics and macroeconomics, I've put two possible texts. One is my own book, and I've mentioned both these books. Fabio Petri's book was published also in 2021. So was my book. I'm yet to read this book, but what he does from my brief reading is that he also places or situates mainstream economics along with heterodox economics for a microeconomics book. But I think this is for a slightly advanced student. In my book, what I do is, again, macroeconomics is introduced through the student reading about both mainstream economics or marginalist economics and classical economics. And this is done in the context of the Indian economy. Another kind of way to maybe talk about pluralism is this way. We don't divide it as microeconomics and macroeconomics. Instead, we have a course. This is a bit more difficult to do given that microeconomics and macroeconomics is so well entrenched, but this is possible too. You have a course on marginalist economics in which you talk about microeconomics and macroeconomics. You have a course in political economy. So some universities have courses in political economy where they talk about micro aspects and macro aspects. So you can have classical political economy and Marxian political economy. For instance, in the University of Hyderabad, there are compulsory courses in classical political economy and political economy of development, which is sort of a Marxian political economy course. Along with the standard econometrics, mathematics, history of economic thought, economic history, again, which can cater to having aspects of global economic history as well as Indian economic history. And then you can have advanced courses which take into account different issues and themes. So marginalist economics, how have they dealt with the question of gender? How have they dealt with the question of ecology or climate change? How have they dealt with the question of caste? And similarly, we can do this for all these different advanced courses in different paradigms. And you can also have econometrics, which is run in a way that it looks at different issues and different themes. Similarly, mathematics as well. And you can have an advanced history of economic thought course, which focuses more on textual analysis and maybe reading classics. So the course can probably revolve around, reading completely Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations and Theory of Moral Sentiments, and maybe an Indian author's text, again, completely. One can, again, have Maharashtra economy as an elective and Mumbai economy also as an elective, but maybe when Mumbai economy is taught, ethnography can be an important method that is communicated through this course, along with descriptive statistics. And anyway, there is econometrics being taught elsewhere, but it might be a good way to get ethnography into the curriculum. And I've just mentioned some possible texts here. So this is Roncaglia's Brief History of Economic Thought. This book, Towards Development Economics, edited by J. Krishnamurthy, what he does is he takes extracts from different Indian authors and what are the contributions that they have made to development economics between 1900 and 1945. And here you will find also the contribution made by Ambedkar to agricultural economics. So there are many other texts which relate to ecological issues. So these are ways in which we can also alert to the students that knowledge has not just been produced in the West, but it has also been produced by Indians here. Now, Data Feminism is a book which looks at data through the lens of feminism, where you ask the question, who is the one who's doing the data collection? Who is the one who's processing the data? Or more generally, what is the role that power plays and different power dynamics plays in data analysis. So these are all which help students to have a wider perspective of economics itself. So now let me move on to part 2, where I'm going to focus on aspects of pedagogy. In a way, one could say that the aims of our universities are to make students creative, to be critical, and to be constructive in some ways. But then there's also another issue, because learners are of different kinds and we use different ways of learning. I could be a more text-based learner, but my student could be more a visual learner. Or there could be another student who learns more from experiences, or it could be based on audio or a lecture-based learning. And then the challenge for us is, how do we have a curriculum, which means pedagogy, how we transact in the classroom, the readings that we give, which can cater to all these different learners to some varying degrees. So in the question of assessments, I would argue that maybe we need to be a bit, we need to look not just at exams, but also maybe at short essays, book reviews. I'm sure that many of this are being done, group presentations. We could also ask students to write short newspaper articles, and also sort of making them alert to the different ways in which we can engage with the material. But I think it's always important to keep in mind that we don't want to do too much. We don't want to increase our own workload beyond a certain point when it becomes counterproductive. And we also don't want to impose so much of workload on the students. So I think we need to have a judicious way in which we can use these various assessments. I think the choice of texts also matter, because as I mentioned earlier, we have different kinds of learners and we have different kinds of material and medium. So we want to bring in different kinds of texts in the classroom for students to engage with. So it could be classics, extracts from certain books and articles. It could be book reviews, newspaper articles, government reports, for instance, the Economic Survey of India, or the Union Budget, or RBI's various annual reports. But I think here it might also be useful to bring in literature. And here I'm talking about fiction or poetry, not just in English, but also in local languages, if people can bring in and also translate to an audience. Because I think there are, as I mentioned before, literature is able to capture certain emotions and feelings and aspects that no amount of theory or any kind of econometrics can actually capture. So I think it's important to contextualize our experiences this way. And then, of course, you have textbooks, but I believe that we need to be using multiple textbooks so that we can have a wide range of material that our students are exposed to. And by this kind of using different kinds of texts, students will also be able to spot similarities and differences across texts. How are the ideas similar or different? How do they analyze? What is the language or the prose that they use to analyze? And again, as with everything else here too, we have to, I think, keep in mind that we need to keep in mind our workload requirements, both for us and for students. For instance, I've seen reading lists where the students are expected to read like 100 pages maybe in a week, which I think is not very doable given that they have many other readings to do. So I think it's important to take a book or an article and try to cull out the relevant portions that they can read. And that should be necessary reading. So this brings me to, towards the end of my presentation, where I'm just going to introduce you to two people who I think will be, whose writings help us in coming up with better pedagogies in the classroom. So one is Paulo Freire, a Brazilian educationist, and his most popular book is The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. One of the things that he highlights is that the aim of education, or what is to inculcate some kind of a consciousness, in some ways a kind of social consciousness. And the reason for, and this leads to a kind of critical consciousness which has a transformative role. And in a way, we want all learning to be transformative, whether for the individual or for, especially for the individual and those around the individual. And what Freire says is that the pedagogy cannot be something that is only decided by the professors or the instructors. It has to evolve in conversation with our students. Because our students are coming from different backgrounds, students have different aspirations and experiences, pedagogy has to sort of evolve together with them. Or the word that he uses, communion, in communion between students and teachers. In other words, how do we ensure that the classroom becomes a safe space where we can have this kind of conversation? Or in dialogue with one another, it should not be a monologue, just me talking and then everyone else listening. It should not be that model, but there should be genuine dialogue that is possible. In other words, he says that knowledge should be seen as a process of inquiry. And what we are really doing in the classroom is, yes, we are giving some amounts of knowledge, but we are also focusing on the process of knowledge production or the process of inquiry, and how do we inculcate this process of inquiry. Just a couple of more points on Freire itself. And he writes that the students, no longer docile listeners, are now critical co-investigators in dialogue with the teacher. So this is a kind of vision that he has for the classroom. Of course, I think that given our large classroom sizes, if we are teaching 50 students plus, it's extremely difficult to do justice to these kinds of strategies. And so there is some kind of a structural overhaul that is also perhaps necessary. And in a way, as I think most of us will agree, that education ought to be an ongoing activity. So it cannot just be about the transmission of knowledge, but it has to be about the process of acquiring knowledge. And these are very interesting things that Freire writes, that he says that if we sacrifice action, then it becomes mere verbalism. And if we sacrifice reflection, it becomes mere activism. And what he wants is action plus reflection coming together, which leads to better words, better work, and better praxis. This is the second author that I want to talk about. She's born in 1952, an American academic, Bell Hooks. So Bell Hooks is the name that she's taken for herself, and she does not capitalize B and H intentionally. So I'm taking these ideas from a book, Teaching to Transgress, Education as a Practice of Freedom. She's also inspired by Freire, and they had conversations with each other. She views classroom as a place of promise and possibility. She also thinks that we should be able to bring in excitement into the classroom, and the professor must genuinely value everyone's presence. Again, I think that our large class sizes make this extremely difficult. If you're teaching 100 students, it's probably not possible to do this. But maybe there are small ways in which we can try to have some way of doing it. And she writes that we have to create new ways of knowing. And according to her, professors must practice being vulnerable in the classroom, because this then ensures that students are also able to share their experiences and they know that it's a safe space. In other words, what she calls for is that the classroom or universities must be seen as a learning community where professors and students are in communion with each other, in dialogue with each other, and we are trying to create new ways of knowing. So this then brings me to the end, and I have two conclusion slides and I'll stop. I've spoken about pluralism so far. It's important that there is pluralism in theory, not only in theory, but also in empirics, and also a kind of pluralist approach in pedagogy. It is clear that theory matters because they have practical consequences, sometimes directly because economists are close to policy making, and indirectly through various kinds of politics. Very often we speak about econometrics and econometrics or mathematics as having no theory of its own. Econometrics also has a theory. Again, we can have different kinds of econometrics too. And so then the question is, why do we favor one kind of econometrics over the other? There is also a history of econometrics, the way in which it has evolved in the West, also in India, and there is also a philosophy of econometrics. So all these things, if it can be brought into these courses, I think that it would enrich these courses. Similarly, calculus, because it's widely used, there is a certain theory to it, there is a certain history to it, there is a certain philosophy to it. Can calculus be applied for all cases? Can we take whatever is the case in pure mathematics to applied mathematics, or what are the connections between the two? How do we understand them? And all these questions can be raised in a classroom and explored together. And this is to go back to that point that, in a way, Priyare made. It is important for us to recognize that there are different theoretical paradigms. And before we take any action, it is important to be clear on what our standpoint is. Sometimes today there is often a turn towards only focusing on empirics and kind of shunning of theory. One can have action just based on empirics too. We can also have action based on theory and empirics. Now, I'm not trying to suggest that one is better than the other. I think it's important that we have a genuine recognition of both theory and empirics. But it's equally important to keep in mind, especially as economists, that context matters. So whether we are talking about the Mumbai economy or the Bangalore economy matters, and what works for Bombay might not work for Bangalore. And we should also keep in mind the wishes of the community. So we are trying to create plans and policies for other people, but we need to keep in mind that what is it that the people want. And one final point, because I spoke about rankings in the very beginning, whether universities or instructors or professors, we are trying to get into these rankings. The problem with rankings is that they're always outward looking. Whereas what really matters, I think, to the students and to professors is what happens within the classroom, what happens within the university. And what is really valuable is that process of inquiry, the learning community, and none of this can really be quantified or put into any kind of ranking. So in a way, I feel that learning has to be more inward looking and not be standardized so that we can get into some ranking system or the other. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, for that wonderful session. It was actually a great pleasure listening to all the things that you have told. You have touched upon very significant points, which we often otherwise discuss outside the classroom, but rarely get a chance to implement within the classroom. I'm sure there are a good number of questions that are likely to come up. The participants have also been enabled to unmute and speak, and those who wish, they can use the chat box. And students also can post the questions to the speaker. The forum is now open for discussion. Please go ahead.
I will add to Sampath's point.
Hello. Hi. Oh, sorry.
Yes,
Shruti, can I?
Yeah, just let me just.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. You go ahead.
So yeah, as I was just congratulating Alex, Mr. Alex, regarding the broad things that he has talked about in terms of what should be in the syllabus. That's going to be really helpful to us, and because we are in the process of changing our syllabus also. After our autonomy of 3 years, we have just changed our first year course, and we will subsequently change our second year and third year. And that, in that matter, your presentation is really going to help us. And there are certain things that you have suggested, we definitely keep in our mind. Thanks for that. Yes, Seema, you can go on, please. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Thank you so much, Shruti. Yeah, hi, I'm Seema, Professor Thomas. I'm from the Department of English, so completely unrelated, but then related. Yeah, I was actually looking to check with you. Don't you think too many choices, too much of pluralism leads to fetishization of some sort? That's number one. Okay, and number two is I also wanted to know, if we are too pluralist, what would lead to legitimization? You understand, because a narrative of science need to be legitimized, right? So how can you because if you look at modernism and all, the meta narrative of Marxist meta narrative or a Hegelian meta narrative legitimized modernist thought. Okay, so in postmodern thought, when there is so much of pluralism, what legitimizes knowledge formation then?
Okay, so I'll just try to respond to that. Of course, these are, difficult questions to answer, but let me just try. So the way I think of it is pluralism. Yes, you're right that one is that there are just too many schools of thought. Let's say even in economics, one can say that you want to introduce students to Austrian economics, Marxian economics, Keynesian economics, marginalist economics, etc. Then is it possible to really transact all of that within 3 years? I think that it's possible, maybe to some extent. At least we are able to provide a certain flavor and at least communicate to the students that there are different alternative ways of looking at the world. Then, so I think that is all right. But when it comes to the question of research, for instance, I mean, I have a strong view on what I think is appropriate or inappropriate when it comes to the nature of assumptions, the conceptual framework. So I would choose a particular paradigm in my own research. But in my classroom, I will tell them that these are the possible paradigms available to you and you can choose any. So I think what is and because the reason for this is, in economics particularly, this might not be the case in other areas, and I don't know. In economics, there is a mainstream in the profession which decides grants, which decides funding, which decides promotion largely. So which means that all the people who don't follow their conceptual framework or empirical framework find it difficult to sort of do that, or find it difficult to assert their views. So in that kind of a context, and given that there are people who operate in both orthodox and heterodoxy, it's important that students also recognize that there are these differences. And the second question about the question of legitimacy or credibility. So one way to think of, I'm trying to think is, there are journals which cater to mainstream economics. There is a certain expectation that this is a rigor that you have to have. Rigor could be, in their journal, it could be using a particular econometric method. But for instance, if I'm publishing my work, which relates to the history of economic thought, there is a certain rigor to that, where you have to have certain textual evidence. Or if somebody else is publishing their work in a development economics journal, which favors ethnographic work. So I feel that there are different ways in which we can communicate, and credibility associated with each of them are different. But yes, I take your point that we have somehow created an hierarchy of credibility. Just like I said, there is fashions in economics. People favor one thing over the other. But my own view is that these are all different ways of understanding the world, and we should introduce our students to multiple ways of understanding the world.
Yes. I think since the chat box was disabled for some time, students have circulated questions, and Varun Pidambaran from our TYBA class would be displaying a PPT now where they have compiled the questions together. So I think that would be more easy for you to see and answer the questions. Varun, please. Varun, if you can make it full screen. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, sir.
A very good evening to everybody here. Thank you, Sir Alex Thomas. We had a great time listening to the points that you had to put forward. It was very thought-provoking. And now I shall go ahead with the question answer session, where I'll be reading out the questions sent to us by various students. The first question that we have gotten is, the very idea of pluralism often seems to bother even the most experienced and learned of economists. The very fact that it has taken so long for the discipline of economics to accept pluralism is, as compared to other social sciences, raises suspicion. So what do you think is the role of political economy in this? Can we call this systematic and intentional breakdown of the pluralism in economics?
Okay. Okay, let me try to answer it in a different way. All right. So one is that people think that pluralism is a newfound phenomenon, or people sometimes think that these schools of thought have they existed before. So let me just take you all the way back to Adam Smith writing in 1776, or Ricardo writing after Adam Smith. And Ricardo and Smith are writing that value is determined in some way by labor. And at the same time, they are debating with J.B. Say and other people who are writing that value is determined by utility. So this is called value in use and value in exchange. So one group argues that value in exchange is determined by utility. The other group is arguing that value in exchange is determined by labor. Right? So this is happening in 1776. Now let's take the case of Keynes writing in 1936. Keynes is saying that unemployment is a consequence of aggregate demand deficiency. Pigou is saying that aggregate demand deficiency does not exist, and if you leave the markets to work, they will take care of employment. So in other words, what I'm trying to argue is that this debate of ideas have always existed. Right? Because if you read any kind of text, you will see that these people are arguing with someone else and saying that why you are wrong and why I'm right. And this is been the mode of engagement, the mode of scholarship in a lot of ways. And this was the case even in a lot of universities, because there was history of economic thought where they were taught that there are different views of understanding the world. But what has happened in the recent past is a kind of standardization, a kind of what I said, opposite to pluralism, monism in the curriculum, where we are trying to somehow say that we have resolved all conflicts. There is only one way to look at the world, and that way is that of marginalist or neoclassical economics, where we use utility maximization, where we use a marginal productivity theory, etc. Right? So this is the central problem, and this is what we are trying to challenge here. But in a way, I think that India has had a different trajectory. Even if marginalist economics has come in, there have been different pockets which have where we have still emphasized the role of history of economic thought, political economy, etc. So it's been different. So I would sort of pose the question differently. Pluralism has always existed, right? But why is it that? And in education too, it did exist. In economics education, when did this come out of the syllabus? When did this come out of a curriculum? Does this have something to do with the popularization of certain textbooks, like Samuelson's textbooks or Greg Mankiw's textbook? Is the textbook culture responsible for the breakdown of pluralism? So I'm not going to answer that question, but I'll leave this question in return for your question, and maybe you can also figure out. Yeah, thanks, Revati.
A very wise answer indeed. We can go ahead with the next question. Varun, please. Yes, the second question that we have, similar to the question below, one of the previous questions. The question says, and I quote, one of the main reasons for skepticism over pluralism in economics is because economists are afraid that one school of thought shall dominate or overrule the others. How, in your opinion, can this be changed to bring about tolerance for intellectual diversity and effective communication or cooperation amongst the many schools of thought?
Yeah, I think this is also, I mean, these are all, by the way, I must say that these are all very important questions, and you should take my answers as just one answer. Right? But I think that all of you should engage with this. And what I do in the class is, whenever a student asks me a question, I often ask two questions in response. But let me try to answer it this way. I absolutely think that people are sometimes afraid, because let's say that I work in classical economics, but there are many people who will agree, who will say that what you're working on in is useless, it has no relevance, it's pointless, etc. So that can happen. Or I can think that you're working in marginalist economics, I find its assumptions problematic. So I don't think that this is important for me. So in research, it is possible for all of us to coexist, I think. Now, the question of whether this one school of thought dominates or not, I think it's a much more complex question, because it deals with who are in positions of power, in universities, in journals, etc. So I will not talk about that. But within the classroom, I think, again, it is important that we have a healthy and constructive, but also critical debate with each other. So in a class, I can ask one student to talk for Adam Smith and another student to talk for JBC. But how do we have a debate? And what this does is we become clearer of our own preconceived notions, we become clearer of our own theoretical framework, or maybe we have drawn one idea from here and one idea from there, and maybe they don't fit in. So in a way, it's only through the transparency of our methodological standpoints, our analytical frameworks, our empirical approaches, and why we have chosen one over the other. It is only when we know that, I think we will realize that people have made these choices consciously, right? But if we don't have pluralism, what we are effectively doing is, because some people in power thought that we have studied marginalist economics, therefore all of you should study only marginalist economics because this is the only right way. Now that does not allow for consciousness, because you are not even exposed to any other worldview. And I think, the intellectual diversity, we can I think maybe in the classroom this is one way to do it, that I can be critical of what you are saying, you can be critical of what I'm saying, I can disagree with you, you can disagree with me. But how do we, this should not be the case to say, to make it about the person. In a way, we are talking about certain ideas, and it's absolutely okay to have disagreements, whether in the classroom, in research, in public, etc. So I think, this again, the tolerance is also a matter of building of culture, and it depends on certain practices that we have in the classroom, but it also depends on the kind of power dynamics and how that operates.
Yeah, that's some really amazing food for thought right there. We'll be proceeding with the next question that one of our students has sent us. The question says, and it reads, since pluralism refers to diversity of theoretical perspectives or methods, what theoretical aspect or method, when applied more often, can pave way for a better and more developed economy? I'm guessing this is regarding your opinion, sir.
Yeah. So if you read my work or if you've engaged with my work, so my answer, I feel that I find classical political economy to be a better alternative to understand our economic surroundings, as opposed to the mainstream marginalist method. And so my work has been in this tradition. But in my teaching, I try to engage as critically with mainstream economics too, because it's only when I understand mainstream economics well that I can criticize it effectively. So I think in the process of learning, I feel it's important to at least maybe engage with two paradigms, because it helps us understand the limitations of our paradigm also in the process. And here, let me just make one point which is also connected to the second question. Mainstream marginalist economics adopts what is called methodological individualism. That is, the fundamental unit of analysis is an individual. Whereas classical political economy adopts what is called methodological holism, where the fundamental unit of analysis is a class. Now, this is a methodological position that you're taking. Right? Now, there is, in one way, because of Keynes's argument of paradox of thrift, which says that if everybody decides to save more, your aggregate saving will go down. It is an effective criticism against a methodological individualism in the context of macroeconomics, because it says that what you think is true for an individual might not work for the entire economy. Right? But that does not. So in some questions, methodological individualism might be an appropriate way, but in the questions of dealing with theories of economic growth and output, it certainly is not. So again, it depends on how we see these methodological standpoints, what kind of questions are we trying to address. Maybe depending on the context, you might have to change, but in most cases, one coherent theoretical framework will offer answers, different answers, I think, to the mainstream one.
Thank you, sir. We'll be proceeding with the next questions. Yes, the fourth question that we have is, whilst you were explaining about the curriculum, you mentioned the need that economic students have for studying politics, ethics, philosophy, and literature as well. The education system hasn't really been inclusive of the same, especially the latter. What, in your opinion, has caused such ignorance? Would it be pessimistic to assume that this was intentionally done so as to carry out political will?
Again, I mean, I don't know about the last answer, the answer to the last question, but I would state very strongly that I think all education, I mean, education is always and everywhere a political phenomenon, right? Because what is education after all? It is telling us how to think about our past, how to understand our present and how to change our future. And when we talk about past, present, and future, we are also talking about material resources. We are also talking about what happens to others. And our actions, whether individual or social or political, has implications on other people. And it also has implications on the distribution of material resources. It has various kinds of implications. For instance, many students sometimes, after certain courses in history and politics, they go back home, and I've heard that students telling us that parents have told that you are arguing about everything, or you have a different viewpoint. So there are consequences on the family, there are consequences in the wider community. So it's true that education is essentially political, whether the viewpoint agrees with the status quo or is against the status quo. It is always a political phenomenon. I mean, it is a political act and activity. Now, the first question, again, I mean, I don't have complete answers to this, but my own sense is when economics began, it was called political economy, at least in the work of Smith, Ricardo, etc. Then, with the marginalist revolution, they wanted to become more like physics. So they changed the name from political economy to economics to appear more scientific. Then, as marginalist economics became more powerful, uh, probably they decided that it's not important anymore to talk about philosophy, politics, ethics, etc. Because in a way, when economics began as a formal subject, it began as PPE. I think politics, philosophy, and economics. So these subjects were studied together at the University of, I think Oxford or Cambridge, because they realized that we need to understand all of them together. But as economics has become more specialized and more narrow, we have sort of rejected all that. But in a strange way, I feel today, if you look at a lot of economics literature, mainstream economics literature, you will see that there is something called public choice theory, which is actually trying to use rational choice theory, constrained optimization to understand government behavior. You will see constrained optimization, rational choice theory to understand philosophy, to understand ethics. So the same marginalist framework is being used to understand them, but I feel this is not the right approach. Instead, we need to actually understand what are practitioners or political scientists or experts in ethics or philosophers or literature specialists saying in their field, and have a equal conversation, a dialogue. It cannot be that economists think that their method is superior to that of the others. Every discipline has a different method, and how can we have more fruitful conversations between the two? And in a way, I mean, these questions of ethics cannot be divorced from anything that we do, after all. And often I mention this, that in microeconomics textbooks, it's often said that we are going to teach you positive economics. Normative economics is separate. But I mean, as most of us know that positive and normative economics are related in a dialectical manner. What we think ought to be is what happens in the future, because we decided this is how it should be. And what we see as today is a consequence of what happened in the past, or what people thought ought to be in the past. So there's no easy way in which we can divorce the questions of ethics. And in a way, we are talking about economic organization. What is price theory telling us? That if price theory tells us, at least marginalist price theory tells us, that if you have perfect competition, then prices are explained by marginal utility. In other words, consumers' preferences are accounted for. Right? So because consumer is viewed as the king, in a way, this value theory is giving support for that. And I'll just give one more example and stop. Marginalist economics also, the way in which they set up the labor market, argues that if you bring in minimum wages, it is bad because of the way it is set up. So there is an ethical implication for that. There is a distributional implication for that. There is a political implication for that. Right? So it sees many kinds of interventions into the economy as leading to inefficiency. And inefficiency is seen as somehow a desirable aim. We can ask the question, what is the ethics of inefficiency? What is the politics of inefficiency? What is the philosophy of inefficiency or efficiency? Why should it even be desirable? Okay, I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Your exemplifications really help us understand these topics, and our students seem to be putting you on a tough spot, especially with the controversial questions in the end. We have one last question. We have one last question from our student. Varun, could you please change the slide? Yeah. The fifth question is, your views regarding pedagogy are admirable to say the least. Agreed. What do you believe are ways in which we students could encourage such practices in classroom? Yeah.
Okay, now this is a very difficult question for me to answer because I'm no longer a student in the way that you're asking me the question. But I mean, I feel that there has to be, I think it has to be a two-way process. One is, of course, if there is some kind of a channel between students and teachers, so teachers also know what students' interests are. But again, what I said, the structural constraint in all this is the workload. Now, if as a teacher, I have 100 students, and I have to teach 3 courses in one semester, if you tell me, or if 10 of you come and talk to me, I will be exhausted and I might not be able to do anything. Right? So we have to, I think one is the recognition of the structural constraint that we operate in. But having said that, for students, my general response is to read beyond what is there in the syllabus. Go to the library, read online, discuss with friends, create groups, create informal groups, have discussions, because often teachers might be overworked as well. And so there is that aspect to it. So one needs to really have, when we talk of a consciousness, we are also talking about how we understand the entire educational system itself, and that as teachers and as students, we might be constrained in various ways. And for these kinds of things to work, a lot of things have to fall in place. But given what we can do, I feel informal groups and discussions are the best way to sort of go forward. And you can ask these questions in class, what you bring up. But again, if, for instance, as an instructor, I have this thing from the university, I have to finish the syllabus. And if a student is going to ask me a question which is not in the syllabus, and I know I will take 15 minutes, then I have to make a decision whether I want to say it in the class, or I will ask the student, why don't you meet me outside? Right? So these are all, these are difficult choices to be made. And I think both students and teachers need to be aware of the various structural constraints that we operate in.
Okay, that's sort of.
Shruti ma'am, you are muted. Ma'am, please unmute.
Yeah, sorry. So that's sort of answered my question too, because I was not going to ask you a question as an academician, but as an administrator. So for academic exercise, whatever you did explain, or it's normal what is being explained, is the satisfaction that is coming to us. But as you know that as a college has to work under certain NAC framework where ranking do matters, where we have been told to have more industries participation, that you have more participants, your collaboration with the industry. So do you think in that circumstances, it is possible to go with this so much pluralism in our syllabus? And then I also, in this regard, will see that there are certain universities, like for the example, your university itself, Azim Premji, and then the Ashoka University. I think these are the universities who can, to some extent, afford to have pluralist approach in their syllabus. But what about the other normal colleges who are constrained with so many things in terms of infrastructure, in terms of have to survive in the market and all? Can we go about with this entire suggestions that you have given to us?
Yeah, thank you, ma'am, for that question. See, I think you're right that I mean, just like there is inequality of various kinds. I mean, even between institutions, we face all of that, and I completely acknowledge that. But I do believe that even if we are preparing students for businesses and we want them to come, I think even for entrepreneurship, it is good to have some kind of a philosophical understanding, some kind of a historical understanding, because too much of standardization means that how do we innovate? If everyone is taught the same thing, how can innovation actually come about? So I feel that if pluralism, what it also allows is students to pick and choose maybe different aspects that they might feel committed to, and I feel that also makes them more passionate, excited, which will also show in the campus placement, which will also show at their workplace.
That's right. Yeah. Thanks. A wonderful answer. Yes. Anyone else from the participants from various institutes? Is there any other questions left? Okay. Then I would just invite Sambat for giving a formal vote of thanks. Sambat, over to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Suryama. I think somebody has raised their hand.
No problem. We can take that. With the permission of the guest, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy
to. Hello, sir. My name is Ayush, and thank you so much for this lecture. Sir, my only question is, sir, how to approach, how to develop pluralistic approach regarding one of the thing, reading the text or having a critical understanding of the text. Suppose we have multiple schools of thought, and when we approach history of economic thoughts, and if we have multiple approaches, schools of thought itself, then how do we actually go about it? Like we have Marxist thought, then Keynesian approach, and in the present, for example, one of the phrase that I will use to explain my point, like in a sense, Marx described that present ruling ideas, it is kind of a idea of the ruling class. And when we try to understand it from that perspective, then can it be said that mainstream economics is also kind of a dominant idea, or the idea of the ruling class economy itself? But as a whole, then what is the pluralistic, or how to go with that approach, pluralistic approach?
No, so I think that, yeah, this is also an important sort of question. So one is, as I tell my students in class that initially there will be confusion. And I mean, as a student myself, I think, it's only with engaging for a long period of time that we arrive at, certain clarity, but still there are many things which, we don't know and we are still trying to figure out. So one is to accept that the process of learning is not an easy one. And there are also so many other, it's not just within economics. There are, if we want to engage with history, literature, etc., there are many other ideas coming in. But how do we put them all through some kind of a conceptual lens and make sense of it? This is a struggle. Now, whether it's a student or as a teacher, this is always a struggle. And I completely acknowledge that. But one way in which we can obtain some clarity is to put, let's say, Marxian political economy on one hand and marginalist economics on the other, and try to see, let's say, how do both of them determine prices? What is the difference and why are they different? Why is there no crisis in marginalist economics, but why is there crisis in Marxian economics? Then we try to say that, okay, there is crisis in the real world, but and Marxist economics has an explanation for it, but why still are we not talking about Marxist economics in the classroom? Then probably we have to go and read, history of curriculum to figure out maybe how textbooks are written, who writes these textbooks, why do we follow certain textbooks, why do we follow certain syllabi. So all these are questions which, one after the other, we might have to keep pursuing. And at some point, we reach some kind of a position where we feel that we have something useful to say. Now, your point about ruling ideas is important. And I like the quote from Marx very much. But there is a different thing also to remember here. Now, power, whether it is with Marxists or with marginalist economists or with Keynesian economics, power has a way of manifesting itself. Now, if I am a Marxist and I am the, let's say, the head of the department, and if I believe that, Marxist political economy is the right approach, because that's what I do in my research. Now, in this university, there will only be Marxist courses. I will not introduce you to marginalist economics. Right? So when you talk about ruling ideas, we also have to think of power in a more differentiated manner. Yes, there is a kind of ruling ideas which come from the West, from American Economic Association, which favors marginalist economics, which trickles down to Indian universities. But we also need to keep in mind what is the vision of individuals within universities. And so whether you are Marxist, whether you are a neoclassical economist, whether you are a classical political economist, or let me put it in a more simpler way, whether you are an orthodox economist or a heterodox economist, that does not translate necessarily into having a pluralist viewpoint. So that does not necessarily mean that you have a pluralist vision once you have obtained power. So the question of power needs to be seen a bit more locally, depending on the context, depending on the situation. And in a way, pluralism to me offers that kind of a challenge to anyone who wants to hegemonize the curriculum. That could be a Marxist, it could be a Keynesian, it could be a marginalist, it could be someone else. Because I believe that students have to be exposed to multiple viewpoints. Now, you can say this is also a viewpoint. One can say that this is also a kind of hegemony, but I would prefer this over the other kind of narrow ways of understanding the world, or just one way of understanding the world.
Yeah. Are there more questions? Anyone? I hope we can wind up the question and answer session. Okay. So I move on to the duty that is given to me, which is basically to propose the formal vote of thanks. So without wasting much time, I move on to my duty. I take this opportunity to thank Dr. Alex M. Thomas for his enlightening talk. He has very effectively conveyed the necessity to appreciate pluralism in the practice and pedagogy of economics. He threw light on certain crucial aspects which are either ignored or not given adequate attention in the study of economics. And his lecture has also given serious suggestions on ways in which we can revise economics curriculum. Alex, your lecture was thought-provoking, and we are quite sure that it will lead to many lively debates within and outside the classroom. I take this opportunity to thank you from the bottom of my heart, and also on behalf of the Economics Department, Economics Association, and SIES College of Arts, Science and Commerce. Thank you very much, Alex, for this wonderful talk that you have given and all the patience that you have shown to answer all the queries that have been raised. And also some of the textbook suggestions that you have given to all the participants, especially the students. I'm sure they are going to pick this up. And currently, I'm reading the recent book which Alex has released, which is on macroeconomics, and I must tell you that it is a delightful read. And I would also recommend all the students to get hold of it and read it. It's a wonderful read. Even people from a non-economics background, it has been written in such a lucid manner that it becomes easily accessible even to people who do not have a background of economics. Thank you, Alex, for delivering this wonderful lecture. Our thanks are in no less measures to our beloved principal, Dr. Uma Shankar, who is a source of inspiration for us to organize such programs. We thank her for all the support and encouragement that she provides for such initiatives. And as we can see, this webinar has witnessed the participation of people from different parts of the country. We had faculty members and students who have joined in from different parts of the country. We are extremely grateful to all of them. And it's perhaps a privilege for us to say that many of our former professors, like Professor Asagala, the former department HOD of the Department of Economics, has also found time and has graced this occasion and this event. And we can also see that many of our former students have also joined for the talk. We are greatly privileged to host you back again in the department, and we are extremely grateful for being back in the department here. And last but not the least, I thank all the students of TYBA Economics in general and the association office bearers who have taken all efforts to see that all things come out very well. And you guys have done a wonderful job, and thanks a lot for the support that you have rendered to all 4 of us in the department. In the upcoming days, we assure you that we'll come up with more thought-provoking national webinars, which will be open to all of you, and we expect your wholehearted participation in all such events. Thank you very much. Thank you all. There is also an announcement.
Sampath.
Yes, Alex. Thank you.
And
there's
I must
also
also thank, sorry, can I? You
Yeah,
want
yeah,
to go
Alex,
ahead? I'll
please.
say after that.
Please continue.
No, I just wanted to thank all the students and others for raising those questions, because I feel that every time I go to a webinar and where I get asked such difficult questions, it has a effect on me, because either I have to read more or think more, and then it has a positive or multiplier effect in the next talk that I'm giving. So I really appreciate because it takes a lot of time to formulate a question, and I thank you so much for that.
Yeah, I request all participants who are here to check the chat box. The feedback link has been circulated. I also request all of you to please switch on your videos for a moment so that we can have a group. Varun, I think you can stop sharing the screen. Thanks. Hi, Asha. Happy to see you.
Hi.
Hello, ma'am.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, ma'am.
Hello. Thanks to Alex for invitation. Eco Rock.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yeah, I request everyone to please switch on the videos, all students, as well as the other participants who are here, so that we can have the group and conclude the session. Is it done?
No, wait.
Yeah.
Keep smiling. Show your teeth if you have.
Yes.
Yeah, no. Okay. Thank you so much.
Congratulations. So happy to see
Thank you.
Shruti, Sampath, Shivangi and Neha. Like, okay. तुम लोग 4 हो, हम 5 में मैं हूँ यहाँ. Okay. Incidentally, thanks to his invitation, I saw it. He said, मेरा department कुछ कर रहा है, मुझे मालूम नहीं मुझे कर रहा है. Like, okay. Yeah, so I would have missed it otherwise anyway, but yeah. And multiple things, pluralism, so simultaneous things happening. So I joined little late, but that's fine. Like, okay, could catch up here. All the best. Keep on rocking.
Thank you,
Yeah,
ma'am. Thanks a
thank you.
lot.
Thanks.
We know
Thanks a
you're
lot,
always
Alex.
with us. We know that you're always with us. The
Yes,
pillar
of course.
of hope to us.
इसके लिए invitation की जरूरत नहीं है, सिर्फ information चाहिए और कुछ नहीं, right? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, yes. I think it's a lovely batch of TYBH. Shruti, Sampath? Yes?
Yeah.
Promising
Yes.
batch?
Yeah.
Good. How many students, TYBH? 6.
We have 30 students this time, ma'am.
Okay. The cat was there.
I will talk to you regarding all these things, ma'am. I was planning to talk to you anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, yes, feels good. Alex, I heard you for about 70 minutes and it was great. I missed the first maybe a few minutes, but that is, yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
Something which I have been struggling, fighting for. Shruti will vouch for it. To be different, eco rocks, गाना गाते हैं, फिल्म दिखाते हैं, ऐसे नहीं पढ़ना है, वो करना है, ये अलग, और उसके लिए literally हर जगह झगड़ा पड़, fight right from the university to the whatever levels, like, okay.
Yeah. No, it's a struggle. That's, I mean, at least in many places, I think it's too much of a struggle. And
Least thing is they would say evaluation में problem आ जाएगा.